It was the kind of event that lives forever in one's memory. 2 years ago this morning, America's reusable spacecraft would set off on what should have been another routine mission. But this time would be different. This time, the 7 astronauts aboard the Space Shuttle Challenger would lose their lives in a fiery explosion that would bring the shuttle program to a virtual halt. The launch was carried live on CNN that morning, and although it was virtually taken for granted that this shuttle launch would go off without a hitch, there was still a sense of anticipation in the newsroom. We begin this morning's special coverage with a very unusual look at the tragedy, a look through our eyes. As the countdown entered its final stages, a photographer, Ben Butin, happened to be shooting videotape in our newsroom for promotional material to show how we cover live events. What we're about to see is not a promotion. What we're about to see is a behind-the-scenes look at how a national tragedy is covered in its beginning stages. The date, January 28, 1986.
Patience has been a key element around the NASA operation all this week. We're going to join Tom and Tier now. Once again, just getting down to about 3 minutes, and they think they can do it.
They are counting. The ice is cleared away, and Challenger should be going away very soon. Let's go down to the Kennedy Space Center and take a look at Challenger sitting on the pad.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6. We have main engine start. 4, 3, 2, 1, and liftoff. Liftoff of the 25th Space Shuttle mission, and it has cleared the tower.
Throttling up, 3 engines now at 104%.
Challenger, go with throttle up.
Roger, go with throttle up. 1 minute, 15 seconds. Velocity 2,900 feet per second. Altitude 9 nautical miles. Downrange distance 7 nautical miles.
We're awaiting word. They're holding their breath, just, I'm sure, as everyone else is. In the center of the fire and the smoke, you can't see any form of what was once the shuttle. One of these solid rocket boosters, can't tell whether it's the right one or the left one, careens off to the right-hand side. Still intact. The solid rocket booster was intact.
Because we're sending crews from here.
I mean out of Miami.
Right, 2 crews out of Miami, and how many crews we got going? 2. Okay, so we got 4 crews. 2 coordinators. We got 3.
How many at the Space Center? Ask the people.
Houston.
Yeah, how many in Houston?
In Houston.
The whole Chicago thing is very active.
Well, we got Clark and a crew.
No, he continues to work the story. Just tell him he's getting tons of people coming in there. His worry now is the air. He worries about the air. We'll worry about everything else.
He's leaving.
Stand by to voice over this picture.
Shut up in here!
Open their mics. Talk, folks.
Your job then.
Don't bother formatting the 3.
That's correct. Forget the 3.
Stuff on the air
Get
as
stuff
fast as we can.
onto the air as quickly as we can. You do that intake 2. You plan the next show that we can get on the air, and you help it. Okay?
We will. Hi, at incoming 22.
Okay.
Well,
They're going to go to Daytona. If the earlier flight gets them there earlier. Okay? As soon
Can you get to the airport in time to just meet that plane and say, get back on the plane with tickets?
Whoever is necessary right now, please move back into the pit.
Graphics, I need pictures of the crew, please.
We got 3.
We are still not clear as yet, Tom, exactly what is parachuting down.
We're not clear, but we know that a C-130 was in the area, and that medical personnel were dispatched by parachute down into the water to search for survivors.
BZ truck. Okay, hired by WBZ. In right there. All right. There's no name on the truck. We don't know whose it is. And they're on a West Star 4 apparently. But we'll try to. And we have somebody getting those coordinates coming over to the trailer in a minute. He's on his way now.
Her parents watched it from the VIP site, 3.5 miles from the launch pad, hugged each other and sobbed, watching the fireball over. Let's get that in here. All right. Okay, let me redo this.
When we first saw the explosion, we didn't know exactly what had happened. And then we realized that I think we were trying to talk ourselves out of it really being the disaster that it was.
There may be no State of the Union tonight. They got to start planning a a shuttle show for 9 o'clock.
What is your view?
Okay, we're going to Reeves. Reeves and Scott, go ahead. Let me talk a little bit.
That is Senator John Glenn.
A long way from history, but responsible for making sure that we covered it, and sad. Little prayer.
And a best theater coming in also.
I think we're okay. I think we can do it with the group that we've got now. Graylin and Hess can handle till midnight. Burnkopf can pick up.
They don't get in until midnight anyway.
Let's let Hess be the overall planner of it. You know how much trouble we have getting people to sleep, of working out who works when and handling the station. You gonna worry about that?
Yeah, we only got 6 rooms in Houston. That's most we can get.
I'll take a bunk at Memphis.
Yeah, right. Well, you rotate, you know.
You plug continuing live coverage, the NASA news conference at 3:30 live, then get me into, there's been reaction from across the country, briefly, some thoughts from people in New York, and you hit 2 sound bites and come out of the sound bites and get me into this. All right, I'll walk you through it on the IFB.
At first, no one was quite sure what we had seen. Everyone was sort of standing.
Hey, listen, I got a major problem. Whoever cut that tape of the reaction took all the guts out of it.
My job began just at the time that this tragic accident occurred, and I was not permitted to have emotional feelings about it. I will have those later. I had to represent this network in doing the things that it is expected to do.
Nice, Rob. Thank you. I'm through with you all. It was wonderful. I appreciate the hell out of it. Nicely done. Good to have the A-team.
It's a nightmare that I've had ever since I've covered the space program. And usually the night before, I had the same nightmare that what I saw today. And I thought it was a dream. I was speechless for a few minutes. And I knew that that explosion shouldn't have happened when it did. And I was holding my breath, and I crossed my fingers, as I always do right before the launch. And when I saw the fireball in the sky, I knew no one could have survived that. It'll be the toughest thing I've ever done in my life.
One more time.
Is there any decision yet on money line?
Clearly a dramatic day for those of us in the newsroom, but there was a whole nother way to view the Challenger tragedy. That side from the journalists who were on the scene at Cape Canaveral. Joining us this morning from our Washington bureau, the senior editor for Aviation Week, Craig Kovalt. Mr. Kovalt has covered the shuttle throughout its 15-year program history. He has also covered all the U.S. manned launches from the Cape or from Houston on the sites. Also with us, Kathy Sawyer, who is now the space editor for the Washington Post. 2 years ago, Ms. Sawyer was witnessing her first live launch. She'd gone to the Cape to write a story on NASA at the crossroads. Thank you both for joining us this morning on Day Watch. Ms. Sawyer, what were you feeling that morning? This was the first shuttle launch you were about to witness. Were you expecting, as we all had been led to expect, another flawless liftoff?
Of course, yes. People were anticipating a beautiful launch, and we were a little bit alarmed, some of the newer ones of us, about the huge dagger-like icicles that were dangling from the gantries and the launch pad, but we were assured by the veterans in the space program and even some veteran space reporters that no, it was okay, NASA knows how to handle that sort of thing. That was the general attitude. And as you may recall, some of us had written stories in advance of the launch, making fun of NASA for having the wrong tool at the launch pad, the wrong screwdriver, and having to delay the launch 1 or 2 times.
There was some talk at the time, Craig, if you recall, of media pressure as well as perhaps administration pressure to push NASA along, to say, come on, you know, a few icicles won't hurt, go ahead and launch it. And there was some criticism after this launch that perhaps those of us in the media participated in pushing NASA perhaps where it shouldn't have gone.
Well, I'll take a little different tack than Kathy did here. I think from our perspective, every launch is a high-risk operation. You can never assume that any launch of any rocket, in the case of Space Shuttle, is a 4 million pound vehicle that takes off on 7 million pounds of thrust and gets going to 17,000 miles an hour over only 8 minutes. I certainly viewed every launch, as I did that morning, as a chance for a major incident or a major accident. And when it occurred, the fact the shuttle had an accident wasn't a surprise, really. It was the kind of accident it had where management, in effect, had all the cards on the table months in advance and failed to recognize the serious nature that, or the serious problem that was in the shuttle solid rocket booster.
Craig, when you saw those icicles that morning, did you have any particular feeling about this shuttle mission?
Well, I recalled that just a year prior to that, a shuttle launch, in fact, had been canceled because of very similar ice on the pad. In Aviation Week, it's ironic that January 28th of '85, the exact year before the date, we had a picture of icicles on the launch pad at Cape Canaveral and comments that they canceled launch for that very reason. So yes, I was wondering about it, as was many people, I think, who are involved in spaceflight.
There have been many reports since the Challenger disaster, Kathy, about people who have come forward to say, well, they knew there were problems. They tried to tell someone. Engineers, one of the engineers at Morton Thiokol is receiving a kind of whistleblower's award for having warned Morton Thiokol, don't launch at this cold temperature. Why didn't people in the media covering the shuttle story get to these people? Why wasn't the story told that there were all these flaws in the system?
Well, as people are well aware now, hindsight is a wonderful thing. At the time that Challenger was launched, I think NASA was one of the few remaining government institutions that had escaped the skepticism, cynicism, suspicion that had been visited on other institutions in the wake of Watergate and Vietnam and so on. NASA, there were people who had written some critical articles about NASA and the shuttle program, but they didn't get much attention. There were always whistleblowers, but in the end, I think the attitude in the media was, we don't know enough about the technology. We'll leave that to the engineers and the officials who sent men to the moon. They know what they're doing.
There was a different feeling about NASA as a government agency as opposed to other government agencies. Somehow NASA was kind of one of us. We were all in this together. That kind of a feeling?
There was an attitude that NASA started out as a sort of a surrogate, a civilian surrogate for fighting the Cold War with the Russians, and it had elements of patriotism and national pride, and it had been successful. It had a good record. There was nothing in its record to point to this sort of the nature, as Craig alluded to, of this particular accident, which an investigating commission found was avoidable if proper safety organization and monitoring had been in place. But I think after Challenger, a decade and a half, really, of neglect by the media, the Congress, and other institutions, and the presidency, was brought to light. This was not something that occurred overnight.
We have a very short amount of time left. Craig, I'd like to check with you as to your covering of the space program today. How have things changed? Is it your perception that there is a lot more emphasis on safety in the Space Administration, for example?
Well, I think there's a lot more emphasis on bubbling things up from the bottom of the program to the top much faster, rather than having top managers look from the bottom down. I think where Challenger got into trouble was that a lot of managers in NASA were certainly educated, fine, decent people, but they did not have good flight operations experience. They were tied up in bureaucracy and blueprints, as opposed to the seat-of-the-pants type experience in flight operations, where once you scare yourself to death a few times, you tend to apply common sense more in launch decisions. If something doesn't look right, don't fly. I think that's the approach that is being spread much more throughout the program now than it was in the past. A very serious flight operations approach, as opposed to a bureaucratic, political type can-do approach.
If you both will bear with us for just a minute, we'll take a commercial break and we'll continue talking with you in just a moment.
Mom, I'm too young to get heartburn.
But you're not too young for Tums. It's rich in calcium, and our doctor said teenagers need extra calcium in their diets.
As much as their moms do?
Is your breath a little strong? Then have a Milk-Bone dog biscuit to help scrape away plaque and food particles to give you cleaner teeth, fresher breath. Get Milk-Bone because, naturally, every dog wants fresher breath.
Smart people are choosing Hampton Inn hotels for their
price.
Style.
I'm saving 40% at Hampton Inn and get free local calls, too.
Comfortable new rooms, free movies. Now that's style.
Hampton Inn starts my day on a roll. With a continental breakfast, it's free.
That's style.
That's price.
Smart style and smart price make Hampton Inn hotels your
smart choice.
For reservations, call 1-800-HAMPTON.
The great thing about Bounce is it has no cling. It gives me the freedom to move the way I want to move. Our dance teacher tells us that when you're in the air, you should really believe that you can fly. And I like it when even my clothes feel that way. With Bounce, even while I'm wearing them, they feel great. They don't cling any weather, any time. They flow with me. No cling Bounce. See how smooth it is?
Continuing our talk with Craig Crevault of Aviation Week and Kathy Sawyer of the Washington Post. Craig, what is your reaction to the latest comments by the commission investigating the shuttle? For example, David Atchison, the Washington lawyer serving on the panel, who calls the program no damn good. It's a sloppy organization. Is that valid as the program stands today?
Well, I think hindsight indicates it's valid. Whether or not they can pull it into shape or not, I think remains to be seen. The trend to date has been better in the second year after the accident than it was in the first year. It took NASA literally a year to get moving again and show some progress. The space shuttle, I think, is at its most fragile state during launch. Those 8 minutes are always going to be extremely high risk. Once in orbit, the spacecraft always performs very well, and on reentry it has always performed very well, and then it goes into a very high risk mode again during the landing process. But that 8 minutes from the ground to space is an area in which the vehicle really is not optimized to the same extent that an expendable, an unmanned rocket is, simply because it has to do several jobs at once, and compromises are introduced in the design because of that.
Kathy, what are your projections for the next space shuttle mission, the Discovery, set now to go August the 4th?
Well, I think, following up on what Craig was saying, I think that it's going to be open season on NASA until they do fly again, and that's what it will take to help them regain their credibility. And then, as some of their top officials have been saying, it will require them in order to maintain their credibility, they have to keep emphasis on safety. They can't afford another Challenger-type accident, at least not the way the Challenger accident was allowed to happen. I think they have at least a ballpark shot of making the August launch if no more hardware problems or other problems show up, but they're on a very, very tight schedule. They have no margin for anything to go wrong, and they're going to have to work very hard to make it.
And you would expect a picture-perfect launch the next time it goes, whether it's August 4th or even beyond that, if there are further delays?
Well, I think this will probably be the most scrutinized, well-monitored launch in the history of the planet. And if they can't do this one right, then we should probably fold up our tents and not try to go into space anymore. I think the ones to worry about will be the subsequent launches when they start to get back to a business-as-usual attitude again.
The question I'm sure we all agree on is whether we can afford to do business as usual when we're talking about space travel. I think the consensus would be that perhaps we cannot afford that. Thank you, Craig Crevault of Aviation Week, for joining us today, and Kathy Sawyer from the Washington Post, both from our Washington Bureau, on the second anniversary of the Challenger disaster.
That wraps up this hour of Daywatch. Thank you for being with us. Our special coverage of the Challenger explosion continues throughout this morning. I'm Bob Kane.
I'm Marianne Laughlin. Stay with us.